Welcome back. In the last video, I introduced myself, and in this video, I would like to introduce the course, talk a little bit about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it. So to start off, our goals for the class, there are two really big goals, two sort of like big rock goals. Number one is that we want to focus on learning how we can engage with media in ways that promote active, informed, and responsible citizenship. So when I say engaged, that means not just what media we choose to like watch passively, but sometimes we engage with media by creating media content, participating in social media, and things like that. So it's a very broad range of activities that we use to engage with media, but we want to be very careful about how we engage with media in ways that are actually improving citizenship instead of harming it. So that's big goal number one. The other big goal is all about how do we communicate that information with other people? So you will be thinking deeply about your relationship with media and citizenship, and that's wonderful. But ideally, to promote this idea of improving democratic processes through media engagement, you will be sharing all of these things that you've come across in your reading and whatnot with other people and motivating them to also engage with media in ways that promote active, informed, and responsible citizenship. So those are the two biggest things, and I really hope everyone comes out of the course feeling confident about that. I do have a quote that I wanted to share about the second one because I think the second one is a little bit more overlooked. This quote is from Charles Blow, who writes fairly frequently for the New York Times, and he said, "One does not have to operate with great malice to do great harm. The absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient. In fact, a man convinced of his virtue, even in the midst of his vice, is the worst kind of man." I think it's a really good quote for this second goal that we have because it's hard to get out there and share what we learned with other people. It's hard for several reasons. One is that sometimes we just don't know how to do that in an effective way. So that's something that we're talking about. The other reason it's hard is that y'all are busy. Everybody's busy. We don't, generally have time when we're running from like work to school to family obligations and things like that to take the time to really like share with other people the things that we're aware of or our experiences and things like that. But it's really important that we do so because if we neglect it, then democracy will suffer. So let me kind of walk you through the organization of the course. We've pretty much broken it up into 4 sections. So the first section, we're going to just talk about concepts and context. And we do that a lot in academia, especially in the social sciences. Basically, before we really dive into a topic, we have to take a minute to very clearly say, what are we talking about? And what is the context that we're discussing it in? It makes the whole rest of the conversation much more coherent if we take some time to do that at the beginning. So in our case, we have certain concepts like media and citizenship and democracy that everybody knows what those words mean, but we might all be thinking about them a little bit differently. And when that happens, it becomes very difficult to talk about these things from an academic perspective if we're all kind of defining them differently. So, whereas there are no very clear right or wrong definitions, we have to provide some kind of working definition for our class so that we are all on the same page. So this first chunk of the course, we'll be talking about defining what are we talking about when we're talking about media? What are we talking about when we're talking about citizenship and citizenship behaviors? Why does this matter? Like, why are we even studying this? And then I really like to put everything into a historical perspective because in order to understand where we are now and where we should go in the future, it is incredibly helpful to take a look at how did we get here? What happened in the past that got us where we are today? And that can help us make better decisions. So that's the first chunk. The second chunk, we're going to talk basically about like, how does media work? Because it's very difficult to figure out how to have a good relationship with media until you know a little bit about the actual business practices of the industry. So we'll talk about like what's going on with mass media, what's going on with the current status of journalism. We'll talk about pros and cons and how journalism is not always a safe field to go in, and how that can have some pretty negative impacts on media and democratic citizenship. And we'll also talk a little bit about how media, different forms of media, sometimes do and do not reflect the actual reality of the true world that we live in. Sometimes media is intended to reflect the real world, like the news. The news does not always portray the world the way that it actually is. That's something that we'll talk about. But it's supposed to. It's supposed to give us an idea about what's truly happening in the world around us. And some media are not designed to reflect reality. I like sci-fi, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I hope you like sci-fi too. But sci-fi movies or books and things like that, they can have an impact on citizenship behaviors as well. Even though they're not intended to reflect reality, they still can have an impact on our citizenship behaviors. So we'll talk about all those industry practices. So once we've talked about putting some boundaries on what we're talking about, making sure we're all on the same page so that we can be nice and organized, then we talk about, well, how does the media industry actually work? The next step there is to be like, what's our role in all this? So we talk about the way that we do not come to engage in media as like a blank slate, right? We have our own personal experiences and biases and different perspectives and things like that. So we have a role that we play in how we engage with media. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the fourth section is that we finally get to the bit where we're like, okay, so what do we do about that? We understand what we're talking about. We've put some boundaries on the conversation to keep it organized. We've talked about how media works. We've talked about our, relationship with media and our role in engaging with media. Now, what do we do about it? So we'll talk about decision making and media literacy and how to communicate effectively. So those are the four main chunks of the semester, but I did want to mention also how important it is in any class, but especially an integrative GE class like this, that we also, at the very end of the class, take a little bit of time to reflect, because all of these things change. And they can change very quickly, especially with the advent of new technology. So we will spend a little bit of time reflecting at the end. So for those of you who are in the new GE program, I wanted to give you a little information about where this course fits in. So we are up here in the Citizenship for a Diverse and Just World theme. And as you're probably aware, these themes courses integrate information from a variety of different foundations. In our case, this class actually integrates information from, I would say, like every single one of these foundations. So let me start with this. I'm coming from the social and behavioral sciences. So the research methodologies that we're going to talk about, a lot of it comes from that. But anytime we study something in the social and behavioral sciences, we do put it into context. So like I said, we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the semester talking about concepts and context. And two contexts are historical. How did we get to where we are today? But cultural stuff is obviously heavily related to that, because how we got to where we are today also depends on culture. So we're going to talk about both of those things. We'll also talk a little bit about the natural sciences there, because some of the decisions that we make and the way that we engage with media actually comes from the way that we have evolved over time in our communication and things like that. So there is a bit of the natural sciences going in there. And then what we will be doing throughout the semester is studying actual media. So a lot of that media comes from the literary and visual arts, and a lot of those literary and visual arts have been shaped by race, ethnicity, and gender diversity issues. So we'll talk about that to contextualize those. And then we are going to analyze those. We'll talk very briefly about statistics. This is not a statistics course, so we're not going to learn any actual statistics, but I will very briefly talk to you a little bit about what does it mean for a study to be statistically significant, So we bring a little bit of that quant in there. And very importantly, what we're doing is we're trying to take these difficult life issues with media and citizenship and try to come up with some kind of greater understanding or take-home points for each one. And to do that, what we're going to be integrating is information from peer-reviewed research and professional newspapers and websites and stuff, and wrapping it all up together into these discussion papers where we're trying to come up with this main take-home point. And you can't do that without getting some kind of skill with writing and information literacy. So our big world problems are: how do we engage with media in ways that promote active, informed, and responsible citizenship? And how do we communicate that information with other people? So to answer those big world questions, we must integrate knowledge and techniques from all of these different foundations. So the way that we're going to go about accomplishing that primarily is through lectures. I'll have lots of lecture videos for you to watch throughout the semester. It is heavily lecture focused for a reason. There isn't a textbook for this class because no textbook exists on this kind of topic. Like I said, this course is my baby. I've been working on it for years. I will eventually write a textbook. I've got a draft of one. But right now, there is no one source that kind of incorporates everything that we need to incorporate. So I am taking information from all these variety of sources and I'm wrapping them up into the lectures. So you do have quite a few lectures to watch each week. And then there are also assigned readings. The readings are some of the ones that I use to create the lectures. Certainly you will not be able to read everything that I read to create the lectures, but I'm picking out the ones that I think are most important for each module. And then there are going to be some assessments in the class, quizzes and things like that to make sure that you're understanding the actual content of the course. So the quizzes are primarily going to be like, did you understand the concepts? But then we have these other assignments, which are discussions where you're not demonstrating an understanding of the concepts, but you're working on application of the concepts. So being able to describe a concept like censorship is one thing, but being able to say, like, how does this relate to the real world, my lived experiences, and democracy in general, that's a whole different skill set. And so we have these discussions to work on that. So best practices. Here are two things that I think are very, very important. To keep this class running is a bit of a challenge. It is a very large class. It is a general education class, and so that means it is highly regulated. I have a very big responsibility to make sure that I can do the paperwork at the end of the semester to show that we did everything that we needed to do. It's a lot of documentation and data analysis and things like that. I don't want anyone to think that this is just a class that I'm making up as we go. There's a lot of thought and a lot of rules and regulations that I have to follow. The good news is that is all very doable. Even with hundreds of students and lots of assignments, I can keep up with all these things. I'm used to that kind of work. But there are two things that I need for y'all to do to really make that possible. And those two things are getting familiar with and appropriately using Carmen and reading the syllabus. Those two things really go hand in hand. In Carmen, I have organization, and I'm going to show you that. I'm going to make a video where I go through point by point best practices for using Carmen. And I have a video where we're going to go through the syllabus and talk about that. And these are things that you'll probably want to refer back to throughout the semester, especially the syllabus. It's not like you can just read it once and remember everything because it's super long. You're going to want to be referring to the syllabus. And so even though this is a very big class with a lot of obligations that I have to people and different departments, I'm working with, academic integrity and SLDS and COMB, and I have to wrap all this up together. But as long as everybody is following along with the announcements in Carmen, using best practices for Carmen and reading the syllabus, this is actually very, very doable. The only time that things go wrong is when people don't read the syllabus or they don't follow along with Carmen. They end up sending me a ton of emails that really prevent me from being able to work on the course material and things like that. So my two biggest asks of you is that you do read the syllabus in its entirety, refer back to it throughout the semester, and do watch the video about best practices on Carmen, because I need to keep this class accredited. And a lot of other students are depending on that. It is a GE class, so it would be horrible if this class lost its accreditation. So those are the two things that you can do to really contribute to that. One other thing that I did want to mention, because I can't I can't show you this actually in Carmen, so I made a screenshot of it because I don't have a student account. But there are different ways that you can keep track of your grade in this class. And unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they kind of think that they're starting out with an A and that they're losing points throughout the semester. And I don't recommend that you think about it that way because studies show that that's not the best way to stay organized with a class. Instead, my recommendation is that you look at the number of points that you're accumulating through the semester. So it's more like you're asking yourself, if I just quit the class right now, if I didn't do any further assignments, what would my grade be? So think about yourself as accumulating points throughout the semester because that is actually how it works. Now, there is a setting in Carmen that can sort of prevent you from doing that properly. And so if you go into the grading tab, you'll notice that there's a little option here that says calculate based only on graded assignments. I recommend checking that box because, wait, if this box is checked, your grade will not be correct if you have missed assignments. So, okay, here's how it works. Let's say that we have quizzes throughout the semester and you may have missed some. If those quizzes have been missed, you won't see the 0 for it until the end of the semester. So if you have this box checked where it says grade based only on calculate grade based only on graded assignments, it sort of hides that from you. So I recommend unchecking that box. All right, so that's a bit about the course goals. In the next video, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the logistics on how we're going to accomplish all that. Thank you for your time.